thank you all for attending our program tonight, Sustainability in Paper, Print, and Publishing. My name is Irene Chan, and I am the program chair at the New York Book Forum. The New York Book Forum is a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to build bridges between the publishing world and the public, which includes booksellers, print providers, print suppliers, and book consumers. As part of our mission, we present a different program every third Wednesday of the month, almost every month throughout the year. And members and attendees like yourself contribute to our efforts by generating interest, providing feedback on our programs and events, and helping us build connections with each other so that we can provide a variety of programs that speak to a diverse group of people and interests. We're all here tonight because we are in some way connected to books and to each other. So it's through collective effort that we're able to run these events every month, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to present programs to you every month. So thank you for joining tonight. Next week, April 22nd, is Earth Day, and today's program is about sustainability in the publishing industry. As the world embraces sustainability, publishers, suppliers, and print vendors meet at the crossroads. And today we're here to talk about what that fork in the road looks like. So before I introduce our program participants, I want to point out that this program is virtual. And aside from stating the very obvious, this means that we encourage feedback from you in our chat or through the reaction icons available in Google. We'll save some time in the end for a Q&A portion, but feel free to put questions or observations in the chat as we go along. Tonight, we have with us Michael DeFazio, Vice President, Production Planning and Sustainability at Penguin Random House, Elizabeth Bartheld, Vice President of Government Relations at Sylvamo, a leading global paper supplier, and moderating our program tonight is Claudia Pilcher, Sustainability Planner at Scholastic. Claudia has been at Scholastic since 2022, and her experience in public policy and propelling green initiatives will undoubtedly guide us in an insightful and fruitful conversation tonight. Thank you to our program participants for joining tonight. Let's give them a virtual round of applause for our wonderful panel as I hand the virtual microphone over to Claudia.
Thanks, Irene. As she mentioned, I'm Claudia Pilcher and the Sustainability Planner at Scholastic, and I will be the moderator for tonight's panel. Before we dive in, a big thank you again to you all for being here and to our esteemed panelists for lending us both their time and their expertise. During this call, as Irene mentioned, we're going to explore everything from EUDR to post-lifecycle sustainability and how publishers can make meaningful progress towards greener practices. But before we do that, I'd like to hand it over to our panelists for a brief introduction. So, Michael, maybe we can start with you. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work at Penguin?
Sure. You could hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I can't hear me. So, Michael DeFazio, as was said, I'm the VP of Production Planning and Sustainability at Penguin Random House. I've been with PRH for 20 plus, let's just call it 20 plus years. Been involved in sustainability efforts since 2008. 2007, 2008, and it's built on various efforts, and it's grown into something a pretty big part of PRH in terms of our efforts. We're owned by Bertelsmann, and there's been a lot of effort by Bertelsmann to make this a priority, and it has become a priority for us in a big way over the past number of years. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Michael. And Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm Elizabeth Bartheld. I lead global government relations for Sylvamo. So we're a global supplier of paper, headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee. We have paper mills in the US, Brazil, and in Europe. I've been at Sylvamo since we started it as a company. It's not saying much because we just started in 2021 as it's been out of international paper. Before that, I worked for the Trade Association, American Forest and Paper Association, for almost 10 years. And then before that, spent 15 years on Capitol Hill. I live and work in Washington.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing.
Not state.
It's important clarification. Appreciate that. Thank you both. Before we jump into our questions, again, I just want to quickly remind people, I know Irene already mentioned, but we do want this to be interactive. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any point, and I'll do my best to monitor, but also feel free to raise your hand at any point to ask a question verbally. So let's start with EUDR, since it is so front and center for so many people in the industry right now. Elizabeth, could you provide a brief progress update for everyone, maybe on where things stand currently with the final requirements and implementation? I think particularly around the due diligence obligations.
Sure. So let's start with one key piece. So late last year, the EU did extend the deadline to the end of this year for large and medium-sized companies. For small companies and micro companies, that's June of 2026. So the due diligence requirements require us to provide coordinates for all plots of land for which products were shipped or sourced. So specifically, I'm going to try to stick to the US in all of my discussions, but if people have questions of other parts of the globe, please ask. So specifically in the US, that's approximately, or 90% of our fiber we use comes from forest producers, and that's about 11 million small private landowners is where we get our fiber from. So at Savamo, we've been working towards a solution to provide the information required for customers. A particular pinch point for the industry is the industry's use of sawmill residuals like sawdust and chips. So we also take the whole log to make paper, but we also use sawmill residuals and chips. That's roughly 40% of our fiber inputs. And it's regularly blended multiple times in the process. So we're working on with the commission. And in fact, yesterday they released the FAQs and guidance. I have not had time. I was about to print the FAQ documents today. It's about 90 or 96 pages or 86 pages. It's a lot of paper to print and to catch up on the FAQ. So I don't have great information yet for where the FAQs lead us. The other thing on FAQs and guidelines is benchmarking. That's another piece that we're waiting for. Oh, somebody put it in the chat. Great, thank you. Benchmarking is kind of the other piece that's out there. So benchmarking is where the EU will assign countries a risk category, so low, standard, or high. That is supposed to come this summer. It could come as soon as May, could come in June or July. That will be a critical importance because that kind of goes towards your risk mitigation and things you need to do along those lines. You still, under any risk category, even if you're low risk as a country, like the US could be low risk, you still are going to have to get these geolocation coordinates. So again, we've been working with customers on this for quite some time. We've been engaging with the commission, with Parliament, and with the US government. Interestingly, the US government released a trade barriers to trade on April 1st. And EUDR was listed in this barriers to trade document. So lots is still going on. There had been some talk in the EU about reopening EUDR. Right now, that has not happened. Time's ticking. Here we are already in mid-April. I would think that if they are going to reopen, they would need to do something by summer. So I kind of give that less probability than I did at the start of the year. So that's where we stand now. We've got to dig into these FAQs to see if some of those outstanding questions were answered, particularly on that sawmill residual piece I mentioned, and some of the other issues that we've encountered in EUDR. Is that about clear as mud for everybody? I know it's a big issue.
It is. It really is. But that overview, Elizabeth, was very helpful. I think we're all feeling quite overwhelmed. So even you being able to communicate that is very much appreciated.
I think David has a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry. It's David Sweeney. I'm at Asia Pacific Offset. We're a global print management company in DC, London, and various other places around the world. So, okay, swear I have not read the whole 90 pages. However, I skimmed through the what I just posted in the chat. Basically, it looks like they have fairly scaled down the administrative burden on of EUDR in terms of due diligence statements. They're saying you don't need to file with every shipment. You can file once a year and all that kind of stuff. So on one level, you know, it's less burdensome, and they claim it'll save 30% in admin fees and all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that clearly obviously answers some of the concerns, particularly from the industry. So, I mean, I have another question, but I don't want to sort of sidetrack the panel's conversation on this. So I can come back to that later.
David, on your point for the yearly thing, though, you are correct. It does. We did notice that point. That could help somebody who's actually placing it on the market, but for a paper producer who is in continuous operation, I'm not sure it necessarily helps us. We were looking at something more like a month, trying to get a monthly statement, a due diligence statement for all of the geolocations that we put in the mill that month, and maybe backtracking a month. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but if we do yearly, all of the geolocations that we would have for that whole year could be at risk, because if there's one, plot of land that had any deforestation in it, then everything we put in the market that whole year could be at risk. So that might work for like a agricultural crop. Maybe, I don't know how soy's harvested or something else that isn't continuous, but it could be beneficial for that. And I saw somebody pop something in the chat too.
Yes. DJ Cav, who is Dennis Kavanaugh from Michigan, asks, how are European mills' usage of sawmill residuals different than the USA or Canada?
It's a great question. So for European, those sawmill residuals are already going to have the geolocation because it will be placed on the market. That would be the first time it's sold. So in the US and Canada, if we went to a sawmill and said, hey, let me take your sawmill residuals off your hands, and all of that lumber is going to Arkansas or Tennessee, they're not placing any product on the market. So they're not ever collecting geolocation. So it definitely puts the US and Canada, frankly, at a competitive disadvantage versus Europe facilities, because those chips or logs would have gone on the market in Europe and the geolocation would have been captured.
Interesting. That's very helpful, Elizabeth. Thank you for providing that explanation.
Sure.
I'm just looking in the chat. I don't see any additional questions here, so I think we'll move into kind of the next question that I have. Building on that, Michael, with the growing impact of EUDR, it's clear that both publishers and printers will be facing significant challenges, as Elizabeth mentioned, in terms of compliance and data reporting. I'm curious for you, as a publisher, from your perspective, what kinds of opportunities do you see for greater collaboration when navigating these sorts of complexities? Or do you have ideas about how these two sides can work together?
I don't think it's a matter of can, it's they have to, right? Because we are completely reliant. I mean, if you think about how this works, you have the wood is going into the mill is making rolls and sending them over to the printer. And at that point, we don't know anything about the paper of where it's coming from. Only when the book is printed that we know what roll of paper was used. So then they could track it back to the stump, essentially. Only at that point will we be able to even start our tracking in a way. So, and we can't do that unless the printer is tracking the information and letting us know at the time that they're shipping the books, essentially, or making the books and shipping the books. So it's really not, I appreciate your euphemism of the word opportunity, how there's an opportunity here, but it's really a necessity. It's way more than that, because if the printers can't provide the publishers the information, then we're all dead in the water. I think the mills are making a valiant effort so far in mills that I've spoken with, and they all feel like they're going to be ready They're going to be able to provide the information, which is fantastic. I haven't heard that confidence from some of our printers so far, which is, I get it. It's we're putting a ton of resources into this, and we're still sitting around. I was on a call today with our fulfillment team, who has heard about it. They kind of know what's going on, but when we started talking about, okay, when this book goes into this space into the warehouse, and then when that order comes in and you have to pick that book to ship to the EU, how are we doing that? And then they started realizing, well, that has to be separate from all of the other books. We're going to need another warehouse, because now you have, at least, because you have all of these books. Next time you reprint, we use one mill for one printing. We use another mill for another printing. In the before times, before EUDR, we'd be able to combine those books into one pallet location, assuming that we're able to combine and consolidate. Now we can't. So we're going to have a bunch of half pallet locations, half empty pallet locations, because we can't commingle the same title because of EUDR for tracking purposes, which now our warehouse bureau folks are saying, yeah, we're going to need like 2 or 3 more warehouses. Like, this is not something that we even thought about yet. So this, just for me personally and for PRA, it became so much bigger today just by having that one conversation, without even talking to the printers on how, on a book that has an odd page count where we need 2 different roll sizes, are those roll sizes from 2 different runs? Perhaps, maybe, I don't know. So now we've just exponentially increased the number of DDSs that we're going to need for that one title. Never mind if it's got if it's got inserts, the end sheets, the jacket stock. With this one example we came up with, I think there were like 9 DDSs for one title. It's becoming overwhelming to us in a way. Just wrapping our heads around it. And we have a lot of people working on it. We're fortunate enough that we have the resources. So for some other publishers and some smaller printers, I could see how this is going to be a problem. I'm nervous for the industry, quite frankly, in being able to comply with this. And I know that we've been lobbying the EU as an industry, and I think we need to double down. And Elizabeth, I'm sure you're right, where hope is not a great plan in most cases, and if they're going to pull back, this is the time to do it. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around how we're going to get this done. And to answer your question, to start from the beginning of your question, the printers are just, to say they're necessary is an understatement, because we don't have anything without the printers gathering that information and helping us with it. And it's really important that we figure that out.
From the manufacturer standpoint, we were talking to our customers mid last year, and kind of realized we're going to need to geolocate every single roll that we produce in Eastover and Ticonderoga. For a little while, we thought, well, maybe we just produce EUDR compliant rolls from one mill. Maybe we just do this. And then, similar to your example, when we sheet paper for like a copy paper, it's from this roll, it can be 8 different rolls, and it's all getting sheeted to make copy paper. We just quickly realized we are going to have to get geolocation for every single roll we produce in North America. And obviously, of course, in Europe and Brazil, but Brazil's a little different.
And what's fascinating about our business is that obviously we're US based. We have business that we do in the EU. But what's interesting, if you look at it, 90% of our titles go into EU, right? 90% of the titles. However, single-digit percentage of the units go into the EU. So we have to do all of this work for all of our titles for a small percentage of our business.
Wow.
Yet it's a wide breadth of our business, right? So it's really fascinating to think about, and to again try to wrap your head around how to do this. It's just, a book is a really complex organism. and I don't mean to belittle some of the other industries that have to go into this, but in coffee, or we were talking to some folks in the coffee industry, that's really complicated because they have so many different. I never realized how many places make coffee beans and where they're coming from and going to, and that supply chain. But we have so many components of our books. It's really interesting.
It is. It is very interesting. Michael, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm curious to mention that because there is so many different publishers dealing with this, and some don't have the types of capabilities to devote, a full-time person, or they just simply don't have the resources. Do you see this as potentially an opportunity for collaboration between publishers in some sort of shared platform or framework that everyone can benefit from?
I've been around long enough to remember the last time that publishers tried to collaborate, and that didn't work out too well for most of them. So I'm not even going to touch that question, quite frankly. I'm going to go on record, because this is being recorded, as saying it's a bad idea. Bad.
Fair enough. Appreciate the honesty. We do have some questions in the chat as well. So Rebecca Westall asked, how are EU publishers handling this? And then Michael, for you, how are EU Penguin Random House companies handling this?
So we're working very closely with our European colleagues at PRH UK, DK, PRH Germany, Spain, and the like. They're handling it in a similar way. Their business is a little smaller than ours. Their supply chain is a little smaller than ours. For instance, Germany. Again, talking earlier how it's 90% of our 90% of our titles, but a small percent of our units. It's obviously 100% of our titles and 100% of our units virtually. But their supply chain is a little tighter. It's a little shorter. But we're also looking at purchasing some software to help us manage all of the data. So we're in the process of analyzing and making a choice on that. So that's one way to do it. But again, that's a cost. It's a cost that we're willing to take, and we're able to share it amongst the various PRH territories. So it is a data issue in a lot of ways, right? And having software that specializes in handling this, we're hoping will be really helpful. I know the Book Chain project is working on software as well. They're working on a program. I don't know what to call it. So we're involved in that a little bit as well. My UK colleagues are involved in that. We're hoping that might be a good solution for a lot of small publishers, and it's a very reasonably priced solution. And quite frankly, the more publishers that are involved, they can spread that cost over multiple publishers, and which brings the cost down per publisher. So I'm hopeful for the industry and for Book Chain project, that's something that they could pull off and everyone is successful with. But yeah, it's about data and just putting resources to it, quite frankly, and working with the printers and working with the mills and whatnot.
Right. Yeah. I just want to be mindful of time too, because I know we have a few other topics to cover today. So I'll maybe address one more question for this. I know, David Sweeney, you said you have a macro geopolitical question for Michael and Elizabeth. So
oh boy, macro geopolitical.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, Michael and Elizabeth, thank you so much. Okay. So I'll be brief with this one. So in light of what you said around, cost, around administration, and you mentioned geolocation. So last year, a bunch of US senators came out and said, no way on geolocation. China has said no way in hell because it's national security. There was also this deal that EU did with Mercosur, the South American trade group last year, which environmentalists say kind of opened a can of worms about all sorts of get outs for Brazil and Argentina and various others. And since, EUDR was first conceived, the whole political social climate has changed. People love the idea of doing green stuff, but they hate paying the cost. And I know that EUDR has been pushed off once. If you were both betting people, where would you put the chances of EUDR either getting pushed off for another year, or I won't say scuttled entirely, but because, the thing is that Europe is now distracted by, Ukraine, Russia, defense spending, budget. Anyway, I'll stop.
Elizabeth, as the person who's closer to government, I'm going to defer to you for now.
So the American in me thinks that they must open it up to revision. The European in me, as I spent an hour and a half on the phone this morning with our EU consultants, kind of walking through a timeline of how quickly they would need to open it up to do something. Time is getting very tight. They really need to start doing something this soon to be able to process it and get it done by this summer. The European People's Party wants to reopen it. They're the largest party in Europe. The Germans have started to lean in. The Austrians have started to lean in on wanting to reopen it. But it's been crickets lately on reopening it. I mentioned earlier that in the USTR, U.S. Trade Representative report that was released on April 1st of trade barriers, there's a whole section on EUDR. The U.S. government sees it as a trade barrier. The EU has pulled back on all their retaliatory tariffs. So, could it be kind of a shit that the U.S. government wants to push? Possibly. Definitely the Senate, the House, there were two different letters that went. Senator Blackburn just asked a question of Jamison Greer on EUDR when he was before the Senate. So Congress is definitely focused on it. So the American in me thinks that they've got to reopen it, but spending time with my European colleagues, I don't know if they're going to want to do what the U.S. wants them to do, and they've not heard enough from the member states on the practical implications of being able to implement this. So I don't know if that's an answer. I didn't really give you a percent on betting, but if they're going to reopen it, they need to start now.
I'd say more 85-15 in terms of it either has to get reopened or it gets kicked off down the road.
Yeah. Remember the ENGOs came out pretty strong when they did reopen it last year and really pushed hard that it only be the date, because they did try to do that no risk category. I'm with you. It would please me to no end if they reopened it. But
me too.
And we're lobbying on it. In full disclosure, we are lobbying on it. We want them to reopen it. We're headquartered in Tennessee, so it tells you a little bit about how we try to push our senators to get this a focus of the U.S. government. So we shall see.
Well, thank you, David, for that interesting question and for your answers, Michael and Elizabeth. I think we'll move on to maybe another topic. I know we could stay on EUDR all day, but for the sake of talking about some other areas of interest, I'd like to maybe touch on another acronym that has been coming up a bit more frequently in conversations. That is the Extended Producer Responsibility Regulations, or EPR. Elizabeth, could you briefly explain what EPR is, maybe for people who aren't familiar with it, and then maybe touch a little bit on how it's expected to impact publishers and printers?
Sure. So briefly, EPR is an environmental policy in which the producer, which is often the manufacturer or the retailer, assumes the financial responsibility of the disposal or end of life or recycling of a given product. It can be mandatory or voluntary. It's been around for years for hard to recycle items like paint, batteries, carpets. The big push lately has been on packaging, and whether it be plastic, aluminum, glass, it's what you find in the residential blue bin. So typically EPR programs set up a producer responsibility organization, a PRO, and the PRO is really the one that assesses the fees. So the fees are never really set forth in the legislation. The PRO sets the fees. There are 5 states that currently have EPR programs in the U.S. California, Oregon, Colorado, Minnesota, and Maine. Maryland just passed an EPR bill. The governor is overseas and hasn't signed it yet. I can't bet on that one. I don't know if he'll sign it or not. And then the other
is this sponsored by FanDuel? Is this thing?
I know, right? So the pro is oftentimes, or in the US, has been administered by a group called Circular Action Alliance, or CAA. So I'm trying not to use a ton of acronyms, but CAA has been is now the pro in Colorado, California, and Oregon. So, as an example, Sylvamo is a paper manufacturer, and the brand owner of like Hammermill would pay fees in Oregon and Colorado. We would also pay fees for the packaging, like the ream wrap, the carton that the reams would go in, not the transport packaging, but even like the plastic strap around a paper ream. For books, bound books, which I couldn't really find a definition for bound books, which definitions matter in these schemes, but bound books are usually excluded. But booklets, catalogs are sometimes covered. So that's a watch out for this industry. The biggest complicating factor is that each state is different. Yes, the pro is Circular Action Alliance, but the legislation that develops the program can be different. For us as a paper manufacturer, printed paper and copy paper will sometimes be out. It can sometimes be in. Just to give you an idea of the fees. So in Oregon, it's 1 cent for 1 pound of printing paper. I know we don't normally do it in pounds, but so it's 1 cent, but a flexible plastic or that strap that I was talking about earlier is $1.04. So you can see for plastic packaging, it's a little bit more, or not a little bit, it's a lot more. The other thing about Oregon is it's a shared responsibility model. So producers are sharing the responsibility of the end of life with the municipality or the state. Colorado, the next one kind of coming up, is not. It is a full responsibility on the producer or on the manufacturer. So fees are going to be a lot higher. Any questions on EPR? That's about as brief as I can do on EPR.
No, thank you, Elizabeth. That was another great summary from you. We should just hire you to summarize all of the regulations that we're looking at, right? I think, this is definitely something that's very interesting and maybe has not gotten as much airtime because of the priority being EUDR. But I know that it is something that will likely impact any sort of publishers who do some of the work that you mentioned outside of the bound book, whether that's novelty products or children's books with different components. And of course, anything that's wrapped in plastic for to be sold, excuse me. So Michael, is this something that you have started looking at all internally, or is the focus still primarily on EUDR?
I haven't, but I feel like by Monday, I'm probably going to get a phone call from someone asking me about it. So thank you for that.
I will
but
say,
no, this has not been on my radar so far.
So in Oregon, we were required to submit by the end of March, and fees start this summer. And I believe in Colorado, we have to start submitting data in the summer, and fees start at the end of the year. So you likely will hear because the fees will be starting soon.
Can't wait.
Oh, yes. Well, yes. Thank you again for both of those. Maybe moving away from regulations and to something a bit more lighthearted, hopefully. I think we can obviously all agree that reporting and compliance are an undeniable priority right now, but shouldn't take away from the other important initiatives related to sustainability in printing and publishing as a whole. Michael, I'll ask you first. What kinds of trends are you seeing in terms of real on-the-ground sustainability initiatives outside of reporting in this industry? And how seriously are publishers treating sustainability as a business priority both now and into the future?
Yeah, as I said, it's been growing as in importance, both on the PRH side and again our parent company Bertelsmann from them as well. I would hardly call it pressure, but they encourage us to be better in a varying degree of areas. We have set a goal to be carbon neutral by 2030. And to that end, we're really taking a look at every aspect of our carbon. We've been tracking it since 2018, based on the Science-Based Target Initiative standard. Every year, we seem to get better at either the data gets better or we get better at reporting. We get more detailed in our reporting, and oddly, we're seeing our carbon go up because we have to go back and restate, if you will, 2018 to use the methodology and to include all of the things we're including today that we didn't include in previous years. So we just finished our 2024 carbon analysis, and we're going to be starting our restatement in a couple of weeks here. So the focus lately has been, what do we need to do to lower our carbon? What do we have to invest? Do we have to work with our mill and printer partners to see how we can either work with them? What investments can we do together? How can we work together? What are we not doing that we should, both as an organization and collectively with them? What materials are we using? Are we using the most eco-friendly materials? We're also trying to balance. We can make a really carbon cheap product, but it'll look cheap, right? We can lower the basis weight. We can put it on, on whatever materials. But we want people to be proud of and happy. We want to be proud of what we put out into the marketplace. We want people to be happy what they're paying for when they're reading it, because obviously the content is what they buy it for, but they also want to feel good about reading it. So we're trying to figure out what that balance is. We want to still put out the best product we possibly can, but still do it as responsibly as we can. But the first step to that is really intimately understanding the carbon of every component of the book, from the ribbons on the top to the crash on the spine to the end papers. So some of our suppliers who may be on this call, you've been getting emails from me or my colleague Nithya asking for detailed information about carbon, and that's why we're really trying to figure out the carbon cost of a book, and add it, at some point we need to add it to the P&L, right? Because there is going to be a cost for carbon, whether it be carbon, if we have to buy carbon credits once we hit our 50% reduction or what have you. And we need to be thinking about that the way we think about the cost for a book, the royalty for a book, the other cost inputs. But in order to do that, we need to really understand what we're talking about in terms of the carbon.
Interesting. Michael, I'm curious, in those conversations that you've been having, have you been receiving positive feedback? Do people have the sorts of information that you need to make those calculations?
To varying degrees of I don't want to call it accuracy, but detail, I guess. So a lot of places are starting to understand their scope 1 and 2 carbon. Scope 3 is tricky for a lot of companies, for us as well. I think we'd like to look at it holistically and see scope 1, 2, and 3. We're tracking scope 1, 2, and 3. We're really happy with any data we can get, and we'll work with any data we can get. The one thing that we would really like, because we want to start using this in an important way, is that whatever carbon that is being reported is third-party verified, whether it be through ISO, SBTI, so some sort of third-party validation is what we're looking for when we use the data.
That's helpful to know. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth, I would expect on the flip side, you're probably getting some requests from partners about any of this or about some of this. Do you have anything to add to what Michael said?
I mean, for us, the biggest topic areas are really on, I know we've already talked a lot about the forest, but responsibly managed forests, wise use of natural resources, so air, water, energy, and then, of course, the end of life, which we've also touched on. But for us, just if I break it up into categories, when I think about forests, it's important to note the best way to really ensure that forests stay healthy is to actively manage them and keep forests as forests. So certification's one aspect of it. So to provide wood for our Eastover, South Carolina, and Ticonderoga, New York mills, we work with a fiber supplier who's both certified in FSC and SFI, chain of custody standards. And I would say that approximately 3/4 of the wood we use at our Ticonderoga mill is sourced and around New York. The remainder comes primarily from Vermont and New Hampshire. And nearly all the wood at our Eastover, South Carolina mill is from South Carolina or North Carolina. And since, as I said earlier, most of the fiber comes from the privately owned forests, it really has a positive impact on the strategic partnerships, both social and economic, in those small rural communities surrounding our mills. So we're keeping people employed, we're keeping forest as forest, because if we're not utilizing the forest, it could become an agricultural crop or a house. Just some quick forestry facts. The U.S. grows twice the volume of trees that it harvests. So the net forest area has been increasing steadily by 18 million acres over the past 30 years. And more than 1 billion trees are planted in the U.S. every year. So when I go up to the Hill, I'm always reminding folks the U.S. has plenty of trees. On the energy piece, since Michael brought it up, it's obviously important for paper making. We take the whole tree, use every part of the tree. We burn part of the tree, the lignin in the tree, to use as energy. 80% of it is renewable energy. I was just at our Eastover, South Carolina mill, and the mill manager told it. It's an interesting story that when we're inland and we're near Columbia, but they still get bad storms. When a bad storm comes, they literally flip a switch, turn off from the grid, and can operate all on its own with its own power from the biomass, from our trees, from our bark, from the lignin of the tree. So kind of an interesting story about our efficient use of energy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very cool. Is that a new sort of?
No, we've been, well, over time it's grown, but we've been using the whole tree and getting more efficient in our process over the last 30 years. Definitely some of our U.S. mills are more efficient. That Eastover mill I was talking about is only 40 years old, which is pretty young in the paper industry. And so it's pretty efficient in its use of the tree and in energy.
Very neat. And thank you for sharing that. I think that is always a helpful reminder, that paper gets a bad rep sometimes. So
we go back to Irene's question, right? We want to use trees and for our books, we want to use
sustainably sourced trees, right?
Sustainably sourced from a managed forest. Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. It's very interesting. We have about 15 minutes left. I had one final question. I think you both touched on it a little bit, but I'll kind of reiterate in case you have anything else that you want to add, and then we can open it up to group discussion. So as I mentioned, you touched on it a bit, but we have seen growing consumer interest in sustainable products in the past few years. But on the production side, obviously there is a lot of tough costs and logistical realities that we have to navigate right now, tariffs, regulations, et cetera. How do you both see publishers and printers navigating this balance between making books more eco-friendly and managing that affordability, and profitability. And then I guess, as a follow-up to that, are there ways to make sustainability more appealing and accessible to consumers without compromising that quality or profitability? And I'll let you both, whoever wants to take a stab at it.
Yeah, no, as I said, that's a nut we're trying to crack right now. We're trying to put out a great product, both physically appealing and hopefully people like to read the books that that we're publishing. And so how do we do that while lowering our carbon to make it as carbon efficient as possible? And I think that's going to be our focus, once we figure out EUDR, I guess, that is going to be our focus over the next few years is how do we accomplish that? And we'd love to partner with printers and mills that have that same feeling and want to do that with us. Where I feel like as an organization, we are big, but we are nimble enough where we need to be to make those changes, and we're willing to experiment. And I was talking to a publisher just earlier this week about how can we do some of that experimentation, and sometimes we're looking for an author who wants to experiment with us, right? Because we just don't want to do these things willy-nilly. So we want to be really thoughtful about it. We want to be respectful of our authors and agents. We want to be respectful of the consumer who's buying it. And we want to be respectful of the environment. So it's a really hard balance that we're trying to figure out. But again, before we do any of that, I just don't think that we're smart enough. And when I mean smart, I mean we don't know what the cost of carbon is for a book as intimately as we need to. That's our organization. I think some other organizations are probably a little better than us at this point. I think that I think we're really trying. We're making a lot of strides, but I think there are some folks out there that are doing a really great job, and we want to catch up to them and be just as good.
I would just add, so balancing sustainability with cost and quality is always going to be a priority. We're going to make paper that our customers want, whether that be different basis weight, brightness, opacity, smoothness, calipers. We'll make the paper that our customers want. On the sustainability piece, we think we have a great story to tell. And we're committed to sustainable forest management, sourcing wood from responsibly managed working forests. We reuse our water and other resources multiple times. We utilize the manufacturing byproducts I was talking about earlier, biomass, to produce our carbon neutral biomass energy. Bound books store carbon, right? And paper is recyclable. One of the, if not the most recycled commodity, or what's in the blue bin out there. So we think we have a great success story to tell.
I agree. And thank you again both for that sort of call to action, almost something for us to reflect on after this panel and think about in the future. So it looks like we have about 10 minutes left. Again, I wanted to thank you both for allowing me to quiz you on everything related to sustainability. But I'll take this moment now to check back in with Irene and see if there are any audience questions that I may have missed in the chat, or if anyone would like to add anything, please feel free to unmute yourself now or type in the chat.
I see Simona has a question for Elizabeth about EPR, asking if a publisher sells a book in Colorado or Oregon and it has shrink wrapping, will the publisher have to pay a fee for the plastic cover, or is the packaging of books also exempt?
So it depends on if that shrink wrap would be considered transport packaging. And then within that, each state treats it differently. And to be honest, I can't remember which state treats it one way versus the other off the top of my mind. So I would definitely look into the regulation and look into Circular Action Alliance, their website, for how they treat different types of products. I mean, sometimes they will consider envelopes to be transport packaging. So, I mean, these are the nuances of this regulation. So, and it is very different in each state. So check it out and see. I know our ream wrap is definitely not, but if we have a big pallet of cartons and that has the wrap on it, it is not. If we have a single carton with that plastic strap I was talking about earlier, then that plastic strap counts. And some of this is you have to submit to the state your own methodology. So some of it's self-reporting too. So I can try to pop in Circular Action Alliance's website into the chat real quick.
Feel free to put your questions in the chat, members in the audience.
Elizabeth, while you're doing that, I think there was one question that we may have missed earlier from Dan Lynch related to EUDR. The question was, do Asian mills have geolocation like Europe for residual fiber?
Yes, everybody has to do geolocation. And depending on that country benchmarking piece that's supposed to come out this summer, the risk mitigation needed could be stricter for certain countries like Indonesia or China, et cetera. Or it could be less. I think this might be the first call today I've had that I've not had to talk about tariffs. So thank you. I appreciate that.
I mean, if you want to, we can always discuss.
I have a question about the tie between vendor quality and safety. I think vendors who produce titles with less waste decreases material cost. And I'm curious, Michael, on the publishing side, how do you manage that? Is there a lot of partnerships between publishers and vendors to improve quality and thus decrease waste?
Yeah, I mean, we are starting to talk to them about waste, right? Because that is part of our carbon as well. It is a it's one of the areas where cost equals carbon equals cost, right? So the less waste you have, the lower cost that the printer will have and carbon that we'll all have. And whether that's more efficient machinery, more efficient management of paper rolls, for instance, that could come a few different ways.
And then to follow up for both of you, do you see any ties between safety and less waste, material waste? I know a lot of manufacturers, they track safety, and typically if you have a very low or very high safety rate, so you have very few incidents, that means you're doing something right within your organization where people are looking at things, very well, and you're reducing workplace incidences, which increases productivity, but also decreases waste and all sorts of things that tie into that.
I don't know that there's a correlation.
Yeah, I'm not.
From some of the printer folks that are on the call, if there is one.
It is a good question. From the manufacturing side, safety is our first top. I almost want to say only, but it is our top priority. We have people before paper. It's on my phone. It's my background on every single thing we have. So it is our top priority.
I see we have a question here from Claire. Claire asks, have there been any recent developments or demands domestically with plant-based inks? That may be a question.
I believe that's I know a lot of our overseas printers are using them. I feel like they're starting to come stateside to a certain extent. And again, that's a question for you could probably have a whole nother panel on that at some point with some printers talking about that and the benefits and detriments and costs and benefits and things like that. So, but we are starting to see it more and more.
Yeah, there's a whole thing. You have to test it of color. You want to make sure it looks good and that it
Right.
produces well.
Yep.
I know Claudia, I think she had to run to
Yeah,
catch the train.
she's catching a train. Yeah.
Yes, you have to drop. But thank you all again for allowing me to moderate tonight. It was such a great conversation. So really appreciate it.
Thanks, Claudia.
Yes.
Thank you.
Go get your train.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us at this virtual program. If you have any questions, I see we have Jim. Jim has raised his hand.
No, I think he was leaving.
Oh, whoops. Okay. Hi, Jim. So if you have any questions that you think of later that we didn't get to, feel free to email them to events@newyorkbookforum.org. I'll pop that in the chat for everyone also. Our next event is in person at Macmillan about the importance of third spaces on May 21st. And so from the New York Book Forum, thank you all for attending and thank you to our program participants. This was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Elizabeth. I hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.